about to hit, so I thought I'd take a quick walk before before these rains came down for the next couple days.
Yeah, and then want some food in a garden?
Look at this.
Lily, look.
We'll just have to keep at it from various angles.
They made this house.
Will not be viable to begin.
Dad, take a picture.
There in a second, but these are all full. I'll talk a little bit about coastal sage scrub. You know, we do some of these videos and walk through with the kids. The kids aren't really that interested right now. So I'll just try to talk some stuff out. You'll see it's mostly, see these sandstone cliffs? These are all laid down when sea level was a lot higher. And they're just slowly eroding. This here is chamise adenostoma, and it's a real basic feature of throughout the Southwest. This is usually called coastal sage scrubs. It's by the coast, and it's sort of dominated by sages. Particularly here, there's black sage, but there's a lot in these assemblages, which are groups of plants. This right here is sorry, I'm catching my breath. Wort-stem ceanothus. Ceanothus verrucosus. You can see it's already got a seed here. There its seeds. Flowered a little earlier. It's early April. It's kind of an early flower. Real nice flowers. Yeah, so you know, it's called Mediterranean type habitat in the sense that it has warm, dry summers and mild but cold, wet winters. So this storm's picking up. We'll walk through here. So if you think about landscaping in Southern California, there's not a lot of natives, unfortunately. Invasive grasses here. Not a lot of natives, but other species from similar Mediterranean climates. You know, think about South Africa, Australia. There's not a lot of Chilean stuff, but that's another similar Mediterranean climate. Probably if you wanted to plant those species, they'd probably do pretty well here too as well. But again, I'd prefer if you shift it over to natives. Here is some Eriodicton crassifolium. If you can see that, real nice felt leaves, crassifolium. Got these beautiful felt leaf yerba santa, beautiful purple flowers. They're blooming right now. In my experience, that's like not a real hardy species. It's rarely like the dominant element in an assemblage. It's usually like, you know, pokes out here and there. Here's some more right here. You see this nice little bell flowers. Nice. You know, I think it's maybe a crazy theory, but some of these things that don't do that well, it may be, if you look at the bell on this thing, the bell is a little too small for a honeybee, one of these invasive honeybees, but because of the fragmentation of the habitat, it's all cut up by roads and there's a lot of edge effects, and that really reduces your native bee population. So, and a lot of disturbance, so there's not a lot of native bees left here. It may be that a species like that with that Eriodicton, it may be that it's just not, it's too narrow. It was probably, maybe I'm just hypothesizing, but it may have been dependent on a native bee, some native bee populations that are a little smaller and could have gotten into that bell a little easier. I don't know if that's true or not, but one could hypothesize. Here's some flowers here from on this. You can see it. You can see some of these white blossoms. Those are that's the Ceanothus Some of them haven't quite bloomed. So yeah, it's a typical Mediterranean climate. We've had we had that 6-year drought a couple years ago. Things have been pretty dry in general. This place has been pretty beaten up since we first moved here 15 years ago. But this is going to be a good year. We've had good rains. And a lot of this is still intact enough that, you know, it's not going to, along the pathways, if you have disturbance, you'll see these non-native invasives, but the main body is still holding off those invasives pretty well. In spite of, if you look back in these bushes, you'll see old 55-gallon drums and various forms of trash and tiles, and so clearly this area was used as a dump, you know, I don't know, 50s, 60s. If you want to know why this is preserved, I mean, this is in the heart of La Jolla. Well, it's a little bit on the edge of La Jolla proper, but the only reason we really have some of these spots that are flat, I mean, this could be buildable, you know. In San Diego, for example, the majority of your habitat by the coast that's intact is in the canyons, because it's just not very buildable. And but this is a ridge line, and it really would not have been preserved, except where I'm walking right now. If you look above me, it's electricity easements for the power. Look at this little bee thing. We saw this yesterday. These guys are just really, they're preparing. I don't know how this wind is going to affect them, but if you see it right here, they've been here for 2 days now, and it's a hive. There's probably a queen in the middle of that thing, and I don't know what they're waiting for, but this rain is not going to be very friendly to them. Get a little closer. Anyhow, honeybees, there's a lot of press about the honeybees not doing well. Honeybee is a European honeybee. It's invasive, although it's been Africanized. So, but Africanized or otherwise, it's invasive. It's not a native species. And bees, because of the nature of agriculture, sort of the industrialization of agriculture, it's very hard on bees. But bees in the feral honeybees in the wild are doing just fine, as long as they're not exposed to, you know, pesticides and overwork and all the sort of planting practices that obtain in our industrialized agricultural sector. They're doing just fine. I mean, there's a lot of honeybees. They're fine. I'm sure plenty of nests here. They're doing. In fact, honeybees evolve to overwinter. They store up honey for the winter so that they can survive. But there really is very little winter here, so they can go year-round. So, you know, if you get a hive that gets into, like, sort of, let's say we had a hive in one of our walls on the second story, and it took a guy better part of 6 hours to get it all out, and he said it was about as much as it would fit in a standard refrigerator. I mean, it's, you know, hundreds of pounds of honey and hive, or honeycomb. This right here, if you look over here, this is Opuntia littoralis, coast cactus. You can distinguish this from a very common invasive from sort of central Mexico, and that was brought here predominantly to produce fruit. In Peru they call it tuna, but it's the fruit of the cactus. But it's much less armored. It has a lot less of these needles. This is native to the coast cactus. It's a great little species. This right here, I'll show you while we have it. Right here is a bee plant, and it has these nice little red blooms. It's also native. In my experience, it grows in sort of disturbed habitat, so it's here along the edge. This is a yellow yarrow. What's it? It's Linnaean, or its scientific name is, I don't know, Heterophylla or something. Anyhow, this right here is a this is a pearly everlasting species, I think. I don't know its scientific name. Anyhow, things are doing very well out here in nature. Here's a mimulus species. It's got that beautiful, I don't know if you can see this, beautiful red blossom. Sort of shiny, pointed, narrow leaves. It's really nice. This, so far as I know, on our little ridge, you have some of the last remaining Quercus damosa scrub oak that didn't get bulldozed in the area. But this right here is the only one on the east side of the Soledad Mountain Open Space. I don't know what it is. It's like a cross or something. It may, I don't know. It doesn't look like the other. Put it right there. I don't know if you can see it. You can see some new growth on it. I mean, during that 6-year drought, it was just brutalized. Here's some manroot, some Mara macrocarpa. It's a vine. You can see its little tendrils in here. Kind of cool. It'll produce these spiked, here we go. This is one of the old dry ones. It's got these nasty, here's a dry one. You can see inside is a seed pod. It'll produce these sort of marble-sized big seeds. So that's cool. It's called wild cucumber, but it doesn't have any relationship to a cucumber. There's some Artemisia here. Artemisia californica, California sagebush. Yeah. We always call it Artemisia. Here's deerweed. I think deerweed, you look at these little triple leaves on here. I don't know if you can see it. It has these little triple weeds. It's pretty typical of acmespawn. So it may be an acmespawn. I don't know. I do know. I think it's an acmespawn, but I'm a little rusty. I've been doing so much political stuff here. Hold on, I need to clean the camera. It's getting a little bit wet. The rain's starting to come down. All right, got the camera sorted out. Here is a Baccharis. I think it's Pilulularis. Another nice coastal species. And here is your the hardiest of all the this is really the hardiest of all your coastal sage scrub. You bulldoze coastal sage scrub. This is lemonade berry. These are the berries from which it gets its name. See, my hands have this little, I call it an emulsion. I don't know what it is. This little film. Tastes like lemonade. So if you're hiking, just take it off. Boop. Nice little citrusy flavor. And then you just throw the seeds back in. So no one's the wiser. And you've helped to propagate native plant species. So I'll film a little. I won't go outside of it. I'll film a little here. You can see the rails going in. That's what? Rose Canyon, San Clemente Canyon on the other side. You can see this is pretty typical. Luckily, this canyon was preserved. Most of the houses go along the ridges. That's your typical San Diego Mesa Canyon topography. This kind of makes mass transit a little bit hard. And that's why we usually run our transit on canyons. And then getting people out of those canyons is difficult on rail. And some elected officials have talked about gondolas. Anyhow, it's one of the little puzzles we're trying to solve here to implement mass transit. You can see this is over here. There is La Jolla Village, or the UTC area, which has UTC and Sereno Valley and the 56 corridor have really become a center of jobs in San Diego. And so you have a big, now you have a big daily, well, with the coronavirus, it's slowed to a trickle, but typically you have a migration every morning from South Bay north to the jobs in those job centers, and then Biotech Beach over here by the coast. And then in the evening you have a migration back south. So that's, in terms of controlling climate, that's one of our real puzzles we need to solve in San Diego, is how we get jobs, how we put jobs down south, and get these jobs here at the end of transit lines. And you see this construction down below, that'll be the trolley line that goes to UTC. So that is part of the solution we need to implement. And we have 59 trolley stops, many of them south of the 8. So, you know, when we put housing on one end of those lines and jobs on the other, that's a good start. And there's some housing, high-rise housing going in around UTC, but it's still very expensive. So, you know, we have to bring the price points down for it to be affordable to working families. Anyhow, so I'll pivot back to just this native stuff. This is if you see, there's a lot of, it's sandstone underneath us, and then there's some clay in here. And I don't know, my experience, it's not very porous to water and species. If you try to plant native species, like Indian mallow is just a great native plant, but it likes well-drained soils, and if you get heavy rains here, it'll kill it pretty quick. So it's not super well-drained soils. In terms of wildlife that this attracts, it's hard to say. It's so fragmented. I remember years ago, probably a decade ago, I woke up and took my dog out one morning, and my dog started barking. And I looked out, and I'll be damned, it was a mule deer, and just leapt off. And I told that story to somebody a couple years ago, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, was this blah 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 8 years ago?" But I said, "Yeah, I read a story about a deer getting hit on La Jolla Parkway." It's like, "Oh, that's terrible. That's the end of my story. My story is finding this beautiful deer." So sometime later, probably later that day, it ran out in the La Jolla Parkway and got killed. But it's pretty hard for a deer to make it out here. Probably, you know, in pre-colonial times, you would have had mountain lions coming out here. We see bobcats, I swear to God I saw a fox once, but we don't really see foxes here. There's no, kit foxes are out in the desert, and red fox, we just don't see them. Anyhow, in theory they could make it out here, but it's a lot of disturbance between here and there. Oh, actually I'll take this route right here. Anyhow, so coyotes, mountain lions are definitely in this habitat, but not here. It's too fragmented. Bobcats, definitely, we see bobcats a lot. Your rabbits and ground squirrels. Opossums, but a little known fact, opossums are not actually native to San Diego, to the West Coast. They're native to the East Coast, but I don't know, I kind of half consider them, they're like, you know, localized. They become pretty well adapted. They're not, oh, raccoons are out here too. Someday I'll tell some great raccoon stories. I think raccoons are just the coolest. They're so smart. But anyhow, so we get raccoons, we get possums. My guess is, unless there's very good wildlife connectivity options with this new rail line, it'll probably reduce the wildlife here, because it's, you know, a pretty hard line, and we used to get a lot of flow. Like for years we get coyotes coming through a little bit, and then maybe last year when this line started going in, there was a whole like pack of coyotes, and I don't know whether it got caught over there by all the construction and couldn't make its way, but that thing stayed in the same place. We'd hear it howl. We'd hear that whole group howl. You could hear pups in there too. We'd hear that whole group howl like every time a fire engine passed. every time a dog started barking, I mean, for like a good 16 months. But I guess they can still cross streets, and if they get enough isolation. I saw a bobcat maybe 2 months ago on the trail in the evening, so we still get some. A lot of birds. Scrub jays have started coming down. I saw a couple scrub jays day before yesterday. This right here, it's pretty cool. This is a cross between a white sage. It's a naturally occurring cross. I took a clipping from it a few years ago, and now I have a bunch of it in my yard. But it's a naturally occurring cross between black sage and white sage, and it's intermediate in terms of form, and the leaves. It's really amazing. Sometime after all this COVID stuff dies out, I'll bring a group out, and you can actually just like compare the smells and the textures. But it's intermediate between white sage and black sage. We walked past a white sage. There's not much white sage here at all. And they say, oh wait, here we go. This is exactly why that's there. This is one of the 2 or 3 white sages on this ridge. And I'll show you right now. So this right here is a white sage. And you can see what that drought did. I mean, it's still kind of recovering from that drought, but it's still alive. And it's also, the erosion is starting to dig into its base. So it may be able to survive and dig its things back. But you see this white sage. Let's get a leaf that's almost gone. They're pale leaves, real leathery, thick, real leathery leaves. Definitely have that sort of characteristic V shape to them. Pretty wide, a nice wide leaf. And then you take it over here, right next to it, literally right next to it, is a black sage. Here's a black sage right here. That's small leaves, relatively small leaves. You can see the little, I don't know, crenulations, or the little sort of wrinkles in the leaf where the veins come through, whereas this is like fairly smooth. And then we come over and look at the cross. Here's the beautiful, this one's early. Here's an early bloomer from the this is all invasive. I'll show you some of these invasives too, but that's all invasive. I don't know, it's mustard or not good, no bueno. Anyhow, I'll show you here. These are the like beautiful yellow blooms of the yellow yarrow. So when these things cross, you have a white sage and a black sage very close together, and the outcome is almost perfectly intermediate rather. There's the white sage. There's the cross. It has that V. It's a little thicker, but it also has some of these some of that real granular sort of wrinkling from its mother or father, however you think of it. So it's kind of cool. And I'll propagate black, white, and crosses. I'll propagate them by cloning them from just rooting clippings, basically. If you ever want one, let me know. I can leave them by your doorstep. You'll never know. We will not violate any ordinances, this right here, what is this, Sahara mustard or something? I don't know my invasives very well. This is cool. Right now the Encilia californica's in full bloom. Take this over there. Nice beautiful flower. This is, I think it's basically what they would call a pioneer. It's kind of, you'll see it in more established areas. It's not as it's fairly uncommon, but when you have an area where there's some disturbance, you see a lot of it. I give credit, I assume it was the city that did this. This is City Open Space, but they did just an awesome job of of planting, of doing this restoration. You see everywhere here where there's wood chips, this was all invasive. Except these elderberries were here before, which is so weird because there's not a lot of elderberry here in this area, but that was definitely here before the restoration. But they did a great job of restoring it. You'll see, except you can see some of these invasives are coming back in, but they just tore down so much of this invasive stuff. You can see over here is the Pride of Madeira. That's definitely invasive. Echium. I know, Echium candicans. Although look at this. Oh, there. Oh shoot! I just scared off that hummingbird. So yeah, I mean the hummingbirds actually really like, the bees and the hummingbirds like, they like the Pride of Madeira, but it's very invasive, so I'd avoid it. And here, a lot of this stuff was this tobacco. They call it Indian tobacco, but it doesn't have anything to do with Indians. It's just invasive. Oh no, this is Myoporum. This is actually a tree, and I'm gonna have to come back with a saw and cut this or a chainsaw, because it's not good. So Myoporum was a very common landscape tree. I don't know, 60s, 70s. Evidently it was a beautiful tree in its day, but you see what it has here? It's called a thrip, and it causes all the leaves to wrinkle up. So this thrip has just turned all the Myoporum trees into junk. But if I see a Myoporum or an Indian tobacco, I'll come back, or any of this mustard, Sahara mustard or whatever, I'll always come in. Look at that. Look at those roots. No bueno. This right here is a toyon, or a Christmas berry. Nice. Another native. All right. We'll start heading back the other way. Get some mushrooms here. Rains bring out mushrooms always. Anyhow, you know, this is our native landscape, and it's great to still have this stuff. You know, for I get on I'm like lecturing a lot about this stuff in the sense of like, I think there's a lot of invasives in here. As you get into these more disturbed fire breaks, this is what's it called? Onion something. It's an invasive, but it has roots that go way down, and it'll break off, and the root will stay in there. So, but I should come back and get that. And, you know, I do think that there's like a lot of value to native plants. I think, you know, getting kids around it. All right. This right here is, I think this is scarlet pimpernel. It has these little blossoms. It's an invasive as well. You know, I don't put a whole lot of work into it, but whenever I see invasives, I try to do what I can. But anyhow, I think it's you know, I think it gives kids a sense of place, and especially when they start like understanding the interconnectivity and you know, how the relationship between the soil types and the plants that thrive in that soil type, and the wildlife that depends on that soil, or depends on those plants, and you know, to understand the sort of interconnectedness and the interdependence. I think it's a really you know, and they go off to college or whatever, but they have a sense of like, you know, who they are, that's rooted in the natural world and in the seasons. I mean, you know, the seasonality that you get. I for instance, born and raised here in San Diego, but I didn't know any about this stuff. And I hated the rain. I'm like one of these sun kids, you know, who's just like always wanted it to be sunny. And now that I'm much more involved with native plants, both here and up in the mountains with reforestation, I pray for rain, you know. When it rains, I'm happy. Like this rain's coming, I'm happy. So I do think, like, you know, and when you have a drought, you feel the drought. You feel the sort of the pain that your natural environment's in, and it's cascading impacts on soil moisture and on evapotranspiration and the stress that puts on plants, and then the plants don't thrive, and then all the sort of insects and birds and wildlife that depends on those plants, then they suffer. So I think I really do think, you know, this I always, oftentimes I'll say, you know, you puncture it at any point, the whole universe comes pouring out. You know, you start with that one little thread you pull, and it's so interconnected. And I do think native plants are like a real, they're a puncture point, you know. You puncture the universe at that native plant point, and it's a real great way to just have the whole, everything sort of pour out. Here is one of my least favorite plants. This is a jade plant, and I'll have to come back with a shovel. Now each of these things, if I don't come back here later and pick them up, it'll root from each of these. So when I take out this, I'll come back with a shovel and shovel this out. You have to make sure you get literally every single of these leathery leaves from the jade plant. You got to get every single one, because it can form a whole new plant from just one leaf, and we don't want that to happen. So I took probably 3,000 pounds out of the jade plant from the canyon right by our house. Just lugged them out, you know. On the weekends I would just like spend like 5 hours lugging them out. But the end result is that now, you know, I planted a bunch of acorns and oak seedlings, and now you've got oak and sage coming back on that slope. So anyhow, jade plant. And here's, look at, I got in an argument with somebody who was saying, oh no, look at this, see all these? I got an argument with a local gardener here. I'm part of the La Jolla Gardening Society and or gardening club rather. And somebody's saying, oh no, it's not, Pride of Madeira, Echium isn't invasive. I said, oh yeah, it is, of course it is. No, it's not. I said, just come to where we are. Each of these is a little seedling, and if you left them unmonitored, it does this. Beautiful flowers, but this is like, these will completely shade out all native plants. This is where I like hand cut almost all of this, and I've planted, I'm going to start planting more, but this naturally is a coast live oak that's coming up from an acorn that probably a squirrel left, or a scrub jay. And notice a couple things that I transferred here that'll be coming up. Here's another oak, coast live oak coming up. Here's a Quercus dumosa scrub oak that I planted. Here's this, I rerouted one of those. Oh shoot, that's too bad. That's stinging nettle. That's invasive. I gotta come back and get all that too. That'll sting. I'll have to wash my hands there. Ooh, ow, that's burning. So anyhow, look at this coast live oak. I mean, this is Catalina ironwood, and I don't know why it's here, but it's here. But this, look at the new growth on this coast live oak. Again, it either survived all the bulldozings that originally put this association in &74, or else it was buried by an acorn, buried by a scrub jay or a squirrel. And this one too, this is a ficus that my neighbor planted many decades ago, a couple decades ago. But this is in the shade of the ficus. Look how big the leaves form. Real thin, soft. This is not how coast live oak usually looks. Coast live oak has thick, hard, barb-edged leaves that are cupped. But when it's in the shade, it tries to get leaves as big as possible to get as much of the sun Like, look at this thing. You'll very rarely see coast live oak leaves like that, but it definitely wants to get as much light as it can in the shade of this ficus tree. Big, you know, pancake-sized leaves. Anyhow, we're getting back to our house now, and the rain is starting. So I've got my cactuses here that I planted along the line. So you have a cactus wall, all native cactuses. And we got this ring of Torrey pines that are native, but they weren't planted. They were clearly planted in a line around the property when they first created this 40 years ago. But now they're big Torrey pines, which is cool, except they block out the sun from my roof, so I can't get good solar coverage. But anyhow, so we're back. And it's starting to rain. We've been out here for a while, so I'll put this online as fast as possible, and folks can kind of maybe sort of enjoy a walk in the sage scrub as the rains arrive to keep everything alive.